One of the things you talked about last night was the flexibility that the vice presidency has. What did you mean by that?
That thankfully our founders were wise enough to say we have this position and it's constitutional. Vice president will be able to be not only the position flexible, but it's going to be sort of those other duties as assigned by the president. A simple thing. I don't think that was a gaffe at all in stating what the truth is, and that is we've got flexibility in the position. The president will be directing in a lot of respects what the vice president does. The vice president, of course, is not a member or a part of the legislative branch except to oversee the Senate. That alone provides a tremendous amount of flexibility and authority if that vice president so chose to use it.
One of the criticisms of Vice President Cheney is that he has expanded the power and influence of the office, and that with the Bush-Cheney presidency, the power of the executive has been expanded beyond perhaps that which is good for a country that wants to make sure that we don't have an imperial presidency. Would you change any of that? Do you have any differences with the Bush-Cheney administration in terms of the power of the executive?
Well, again, as I tried to explain last night, our executive branch will know what our job is. We have the three very distinct branches of government. We won't be bleeding our authority over to the legislative or judicial branch. We'll do our jobs in the executive branch as administrators.
Okay. A couple of questions about past interviews.
Yeah.
This morning, last night, we were in the spin room and people came flowing in there, and one of the questions that a lot of folks said was, okay, where was the Governor Palin in Katie Couric's interview that just debated and arguably defeated Joe Biden in a vice presidential debate? There's been some criticism, as I know you know. What happened? Go ahead, explain it to us.
Okay, I'll tell you, honestly, the Sarah Palin in those interviews is a little bit annoyed because it's like, man, no matter what you say, you're going to get clobbered. If you choose to answer a question, you're going to get clobbered on the answer. If you choose to try to pivot and go on to another subject that you believe that Americans want to hear about, you'll get clobbered for that too. But in those Katie Couric interviews, I did feel that there were a lot of things that she was missing in terms of an opportunity to ask what a VP candidate stands for, what the values are represented in our ticket. I wanted to talk about Barack Obama increasing taxes, which will lead to killing jobs. I wanted to talk about his proposal to increase government spending by another $1 trillion. Some of his comments that he's made about the war that I think may, in my world, disqualify someone from consideration as the next commander-in-chief. Some of the comments that he's made about Afghanistan, what we're doing there, supposedly just air raiding villages and killing civilians. That's reckless, and I wanted to talk about things like that. So I guess I have to apologize for being a bit annoyed, but that's also an indication of being outside of that Washington elite, outside of the media elite also, and just wanted to talk to Americans without the filter and let them know what we stand for.
Okay, so at the risk of annoying you, when you were asked, what do you read, newspapers and magazines, you didn't answer it, or you said, oh, I have all kinds of resources.
Right.
What do you read? I mean,
I read the same things that other people across the country read, including the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Economist, and some of these publications that we've recently even been interviewed through up there in Alaska because of everything that we're doing with oil and gas. A lot of the investment publications especially are interviewing us, asking us how are we being so successful up there in contributing to our nation's steps towards energy independence. So my response to her, I guess it was kind of flippant, but I was sort of taken aback. Like, the suggestion was, you're way up there in a faraway place in Alaska. Do you know that there are publications in the rest of the world that are read by many? And I was taken aback by that because, I don't know, the suggestion just was a little bit of, perhaps we're not in tune with the rest of the world.
Well, I mean, the idea is not to do gotcha questions, but you've heard the question already from Katie about Supreme Court decisions that you disagree with. As a conservative,
right.
There are folks in the Republican Party who would expect a vice presidential nominee to understand judicial conservatism and have something that they might object to.
And that's fair, right. And on that one, truly, I shouldn't have been so flippant and just sort of brushed aside that, because that was an important question and I should have answered it. And yeah, I can cite a lot of cases that I absolutely disagree with the Supreme Court on.
Is there one particularly, or a couple, or something that sort of exemplifies or illustrates what your sort of judicial philosophy would be?
A recent one, Kennedy versus Louisiana, where the Supreme Court will tell a state that they can't impose the death penalty even on heinous crime of repeat child rapists, that a state its rights were taken away by the Supreme Court, and we would not be able to decide for ourselves whether the death penalty in a case like that could be implemented or not. That one, I'm certainly not a supporter of that decision. The Kelo case also with eminent domain, that affects me as a governor. It had affected me as a mayor also. Private property rights are so precious in this nation, and for the Supreme Court to have sided with government instead of the people, the property owners on that was frustrating. And then another one personally affecting me also, the Exxon Valdez oil spill. The siding with the oil company as they decimated Alaska's coastline and much of our fisheries and much of our coastal communities' livelihoods, the people who live there, and they sided with Exxon on the punishment, the punitive damage that was to be awarded. Exxon won on that one in a sense, and that was frustrating.
Governor, people hear that answer and they're going to be mystified. It's like, well, wait a minute. That's the Sarah Palin that we saw when you first joined the ticket, that when you hit the campaign trail that invigorated Republicans. I mean, is this going to boil down to one of those situations where it's Palin versus the press, and it depends on who asks the question?
Oh, that would be the worst strategy ever that I could think of. And I have a journalism degree, so I know how you guys work also. I'll tell you, what I need to do is commit to not being so annoyed and impatient with mainstream media. And I will make that commitment, because I do understand that that is how I speak to the American people in a position like this. I speak to you and through you, and that way that message is received by American people. So I apologize for the I guess flippant response that I gave through that interview on a couple of questions. I'm going to try harder, but I would ask also then that the media tries a little bit harder also, and that this is a two-way street, that there's fairness, just objectivity and fairness and truth. That's all Americans ask for. Objectivity. And that is all Americans ask for as we send our young men and women overseas in a war zone to fight for democracy and freedoms, including freedom of the press. We've really got to have a mutually beneficial relationship here with those fighting for the freedom of the press, and then the press, though, not taking advantage of that and exploiting a situation that perhaps that they would want to capture and abuse the privilege. We just want truth, we want fairness, we want that balance.